The Odyssey summary, Homer's homecoming epic, and the price of return. The Odyssey is an ancient Greek epic poem traditionally attributed to Homer, most often dated to around the late 8th century BCE. The Odyssey summary walks you through what happens, why it still works, and what it reveals about power, identity, and the brutal difficulty of going back after you have been changed. On the surface, the story is simple. Odysseus wants to get home. Under that surface, the poem asks a harder question. What does home even mean when time has passed, your reputation has grown into myth, and the world you left behind has been living without you? The Odyssey is also a story about a household under siege. While Odysseus is gone, the center cannot hold. Penelope and Telemachus are surrounded by men who treat hospitality like a loophole and power like a meal ticket. The poem turns domestic space into a battlefield, and it makes the return as dangerous as the journey. The story turns on whether Odysseus can return to Ithaca and reclaim his home without losing what makes him himself. Key points. The Odyssey is a homecoming story where survival depends as much on patience and judgment as on strength. The poem opens with a crisis at home, showing that absence creates power vacuums that someone always tries to fill. Odysseus faces temptations that threaten identity, memory, and purpose, not just physical safety. The code of hospitality functions like a moral stress test that exposes who is civilized and who is predatory. Telemachus grows from passive uncertainty to active decision-making as the household's pressure intensifies. Penelope's endurance is strategic, not passive, and the poem treats loyalty as a form of intelligence. The gods amplify human traits already present, turning pride, rage, and generosity into fate-level forces. Full plot. Here is the full plot summary with spoilers. The Odyssey begins after the Trojan War, but it starts in the middle of the larger story, with Odysseus still missing and Ithaca already breaking under the strain of his absence. Act 1. Set up an inciting incident. Odysseus, king of Ithaca, desperate to return home, is held on Ogygia by Calypso, a nymph who wants Odysseus to stay as her partner. Odysseus is alive but stuck, and Odysseus's longing is not treated like weakness. The poem frames it as the central drive of the character. Odysseus wants a mortal life with limits, duties, and history, not an endless present. Back in Ithaca, Penelope, Odysseus's wife, trying to protect the household, is surrounded by suitors, elite men trying to force a remarriage and seize Odysseus's status. The suitors live in Odysseus's palace, eat his stores, and treat the home as if it is already theirs. Telemachus, Odysseus's son, newly adult and politically cornered, cannot remove the suitors alone, and Telemachus does not yet have the social power to command loyalty. Athena, goddess of strategy and Odysseus's patron, pushing for Odysseus's return, brings the problem to Zeus, king of the gods, balancing divine politics. Zeus agrees that the stalemate must end and sends Hermes, messenger god, enforcing divine decisions, to Calypso with an order: release Odysseus. Calypso complies, but not gladly. Calypso provides tools and provisions, and Odysseus builds a raft because Odysseus has no crew left and no safe escort. Odysseus leaves by sea, which immediately triggers Poseidon, sea god, angry at Odysseus for past offenses, to intervene. Poseidon does not need to invent a new punishment. Poseidon uses the ocean itself, turning travel into a verdict. A storm wrecks the raft, and Odysseus survives by endurance, improvisation, and help that arrives at the edge of death. Odysseus washes ashore on Scheria, land of the Phaeacians, a seafaring people whose ships can carry travelers swiftly. Odysseus meets Nausicaa, Phaeacian princess, cautious but curious, and appeals for aid without threatening her. Nausicaa guides Odysseus toward the palace, and Odysseus reaches Alcinous, Phaeacian king, proud of his people's hospitality, and Arete, Phaeacian queen, whose judgment matters. The Phaeacians feed Odysseus, listen, and recognize the marks of a man shaped by hardship, even before they know his name. Alcinous promises passage home, but Alcinous asks Odysseus to explain who Odysseus is and how Odysseus arrived. Odysseus responds with the tool Odysseus always uses when force will not work: Narrative. Odysseus begins to tell the story of the journey from Troy, turning personal disaster into a coherent account that earns help, gifts, and a ship. What changes here is that Odysseus moves from trapped survivor to active strategist, using story as a way to restart the path home. Act 2. Escalation and midpoint shift. Odysseus tells the Phaeacians about the return attempt after Troy, and the pattern becomes clear fast. Odysseus's choices matter, but so do the choices of everyone around Odysseus. Odysseus and Odysseus's men first raid the Cicones, taking plunder as if the war logic still applies. The Cicones regroup and counterattack. The consequence is immediate: losses, disorder, and retreat. The raid teaches the wrong lesson at the wrong time. The war is over, but Odysseus's crew has not learnt how to live in a world where every coast is not an enemy city and every victory does not pay. A storm drives the ships off course to the land of the Lotus Eaters, a people whose food erases the desire to return. Some of Odysseus's men eat the lotus and stop caring about home. Odysseus drags those men back by force, because the danger is not a monster. The danger is forgetting why the journey exists at all. Next comes the Cyclops episode, and it becomes a blueprint for the entire epic's moral logic. Odysseus lands near the Cyclopes and enters the cave of Polyphemus, a Cyclops, Poseidon's son, operating outside human law. Odysseus wants provisions and expects the norms of hospitality. Polyphemus responds by eating Odysseus's men. This is not just violence, it is the negation of civilization's basic exchange, guest and host. Odysseus cannot beat Polyphemus in a fair fight, because Polyphemus is stronger and the cave is a trap. Odysseus uses cunning. Odysseus offers wine, gives the false name Nobody, blinds Polyphemus, and escapes beneath the bellies of sheep. The plan succeeds, but Odysseus makes a choice that poisons everything that follows. As Odysseus sails away, Odysseus taunts Polyphemus and reveals Odysseus's real identity. The taunt gives Odysseus glory, but it also gives Poseidon the target. Polyphemus prays for revenge, and Poseidon listens. Odysseus reaches Aeolus, keeper of winds, able to control travel, and receives a bag holding dangerous winds, with one fair wind left free to push Odysseus toward Ithaca. Ithaca comes into sight, and the crew almost succeeds. Then the crew suspects the bag contains treasure. The crew opens it, while Odysseus sleeps. The winds explode out, and the ships are driven back. The consequence is psychological as much as physical. The crew has proven untrustworthy at the moment when trust mattered most. Aeolus refuses to help again because repeated rescue looks like the gods backing a man the gods oppose. Odysseus is pushed onwards to the Laestrygonians, giants who destroy ships and eat men. Almost the entire fleet is lost in a single catastrophe. Odysseus escapes with one ship, which changes the scale of the story. From here on, Odysseus is not leading an army. Odysseus is guarding a dwindling remnant. Odysseus reaches Circe, a sorceress, isolated and powerful, and Circe turns men into pigs. Odysseus avoids the trap with help from Hermes and forces Circe into a truce. Circe restores the men and becomes both host and hazard. Circe offers pleasure, safety, and delay. Odysseus stays for a long period because the crew is exhausted and because comfort is tempting after terror. But comfort has a cost. The longer Odysseus stays, the more the idea of home becomes abstract. The crew eventually pushes Odysseus to continue. Circe gives the next step. Odysseus must go to the underworld to consult Tiresias, prophet, able to tell Odysseus what cannot be learnt by scouting or force. This descent is the midpoint shift. The journey stops being a sequence of escapes and becomes a mission with conditions. Tiresias warns Odysseus about the shape of the road ahead and the dangers that will undo the return if Odysseus fails to control the crew and Odysseus fails to control Odysseus's own impulses. In the underworld, Odysseus meets the dead, and the poem turns the war's aftermath into an emotional ledger. Odysseus learns how other heroes returned, how violence echoes into the home, and how reputation survives while bodies do not. The underworld section makes the story's stakes explicit. Homecoming is not only about reaching Ithaca. Homecoming is about arriving in a state that allows life to continue. Odysseus returns to Circe's island, performs rites for the dead crew member left behind, and sets sail again with instructions. The next trials are not random. They are designed as narrowing corridors where every option has a price. Odysseus passes the sirens, voices that promise knowledge and gratification. Odysseus wants to hear them, so Odysseus orders the crew to plug their ears with wax and tie Odysseus to the mast. The plan contains both parts of Odysseus, the part that craves experience and the part that knows craving is lethal. Odysseus hears the song and survives because restraint is enforced. Then Odysseus faces Scylla and Charybdis, a monster and a deadly whirlpool, forcing a choice between different kinds of loss. Odysseus cannot save everyone. Odysseus chooses the path where a smaller number die, rather than risking total destruction. The poem does not soften it. Leadership includes selecting which tragedy to accept. The final warning is about the cattle of Helios, sacred animals whose harm triggers divine punishment. Odysseus wants to avoid the island entirely, but storms trap the crew. Food runs out. The men break the taboo and slaughter the cattle while Odysseus is away or unable to stop them. Zeus destroys the ship as punishment. Everyone dies except Odysseus, who is thrown back into the sea. Odysseus clings to wreckage and reaches Calypso's island, where the story began. Odysseus's narrative catches up to the present. The Phaeacians now understand that Odysseus is not merely unlucky. Odysseus is trapped inside a chain of choices, divine grudges, and human weakness. The Phaeacians send Odysseus home asleep, placing Odysseus on Ithaca with gifts. Odysseus wakes disoriented and does not recognize the land at first, which fits the poem's logic. Returning does not feel like returning when you have been away too long. Athena appears and tells Odysseus the truth. Ithaca is not safe. The suitors still occupy the palace. Athena changes Odysseus's appearance into that of an old beggar, giving Odysseus a disguise as both protection and a weapon. Odysseus goes to Eumaeus, swineherd, loyal to Odysseus, and rooted in the land. Eumaeus offers hospitality without knowing the beggar's identity, which proves Eumaeus's character and sets a moral contrast with the palace. Meanwhile, Telemachus returns from the journey Athena set in motion earlier. Telemachus has visited Nestor, elder Greek leader model of stable authority, and Menelaus, Greek king living with the scars of war and the memory of Helen. Telemachus learns that Odysseus is alive and trapped, which gives Telemachus hope and urgency. The suitors plot to kill Telemachus on the way back, proving the crisis is now lethal, not merely humiliating. Athena brings Telemachus to Eumaeus's hut and orchestrates the recognition. Odysseus reveals Odysseus's identity to Telemachus, and father and son pivot from longing to planning. The plan is slow because direct confrontation in the palace would fail. The suitors have numbers, weapons, and the advantage of being inside the house. Odysseus and Telemachus go to the palace with Odysseus still disguised. Odysseus observes how the suitors behave and tests who among the household remains loyal. The suitors mock the beggar, throw objects and treat vulnerability as entertainment. The cruelty is not incidental. It is evidence that the suitors are not legitimate replacements for Odysseus. The suitors are a predatory class living off someone else's stability. Odysseus also meets servants and old allies. Euryclea, nurse tied to the household's history, recognizes Odysseus by a scar while washing Odysseus's feet. Odysseus forces Euryclea to keep silent because recognition too early would trigger chaos before the plan is ready. Penelope meets the disguised Odysseus and speaks with the beggar as if searching for truth without fully committing to belief. Penelope is not naive. Penelope asks questions, weighs stories, and holds the line as long as Penelope can. Penelope proposes a contest involving Odysseus's bow, promising marriage to whoever can string it and perform the required feat. On the surface, it is a decision to end the stalemate. Underneath, it is a trap designed to expose the suitor's weakness and create an opening for a rightful claimant. Odysseus and Telemachus quietly remove weapons from the hall so the suitors cannot reach them quickly. Loyal servants align with Odysseus's plan. The household becomes a staged space where hospitality has been abused for so long that only force can reset the rules. What changes here is that the journey turns inward, and Odysseus must win at home through disguise, timing, and controlled violence rather than travel. Act 3. Climax and Resolution. The endgame begins with the contest. The suitors attempt to string Odysseus's bow and fail one by one. Telemachus attempts and nearly succeeds, but stops at Odysseus's signal, keeping the plan intact and avoiding exposing Telemachus too soon. Odysseus, still in beggar form, asks to try. The suitors resist because allowing the beggar to touch the bow risks humiliation. Penelope permits it, and Odysseus strings the bow with ease. Odysseus performs the feat and takes the moment to turn a test into judgment. Odysseus reveals Odysseus's identity and begins the slaughter of the suitors, with Telemachus and loyal servants fighting at Odysseus's side. The suitors are trapped in the hall they have occupied for months. The lack of weapons matters. The plan's earlier steps now pay off. The suitors plead, bargain, and attempt retaliation, but the structure of the room and the removal of arms narrow the suitors' options to panic. After the suitors are killed, Odysseus orders the house purified and deals with servants who enabled the suitors. The poem frames the restoration as total. It is not enough for Odysseus to return. The household must be reordered, and betrayal must have consequences, or the system will collapse again. Odysseus reunites with Penelope, but Penelope does not accept the reunion on emotion alone. Penelope tests Odysseus with a private detail about the marriage bed. Odysseus responds correctly, proving knowledge that cannot be faked. The reunion becomes credible because it is verified, not simply desired. Odysseus then goes to Laertes, Odysseus's father, old and withdrawn, and reveals Odysseus's identity with another set of personal proofs. The return spreads outward from spouse to parent to community. But the story does not end with the suitors dead. The families of the suitors gather for revenge, and Ithaca threatens to fall into civil bloodshed. Odysseus prepares for another fight, which shows how fragile restoration is when violence is the method used to achieve it. Athena intervenes, backed by Zeus, and stops the conflict before it becomes a new cycle of killing. The poem ends with enforced peace, not a negotiated settlement. The household is restored, but the larger community's stability depends on a divine command to stop. Analysis and themes. Theme 1. Homecoming as identity. Claim. The poem treats returning home as a test of whether a person can re-enter life without being consumed by what the journey demanded. Evidence. Odysseus resists the lotus. Because forgetting is a form of death, Odysseus survives the sirens by binding himself. Odysseus arrives in Ithaca and does not even recognize it. At first, Odysseus must prove himself through scars, stories, and knowledge. So what? Modern life produces its own Odysseys, long projects, wars, migrations, and careers that pull people away for years. The hard part is not traveling. The challenging part is becoming legible again to the people who stayed and becoming legible to yourself. Theme 2. Hospitality as social contract. Claim. Hospitality functions as the poem's moral measuring tool, separating civilization from predation. Evidence. Eumaeus offers food and shelter to a beggar without knowing who the beggar is. The Phaeacians offer aid and transport because story and need create. Obligation. Polyphemus violates hospitality by eating guests. The suitors violate hospitality by overstaying, consuming resources, and threatening the household. So what? Every society has rules for who gets welcomed, who gets protected, and who gets turned away. The Odyssey insists those rules are not soft manners. They are stability mechanisms, and when they are abused, violence follows. Theme 3. Cunning versus force. Claim. The poem elevates strategic intelligence as a form of heroism equal to physical power. Evidence. Odysseus survives Polyphemus through deception and timing. Odysseus survives the sirens through self-binding. Odysseus defeats the suitors through planning, disguise, and the controlled removal of weapons. So what? In modern systems, brute force often looks like status, but strategy decides outcomes more reliably. This applies to politics, business, negotiation, and even personal relationships. Power is not only what you can do, but also what you can make others believe, predict, or misunderstand. Theme 4. The cost of pride. Claim: pride turns victories into future losses by converting private success into public provocation. Evidence: Odysseus's taunt to Polyphemus secures a name but triggers Poseidon's wrath. The crew's curiosity about the windbag destroys a near return. The suitor's arrogance blinds them to danger even when signals pile up. So what? Many modern failures are not caused by lack of competence. They are caused by the need to be seen winning. The Odyssey shows how quickly performance can become sabotage. Theme 5. Testing as love and governance. Claim: the poem treats testing not as cruelty, but as necessary verification in a world where appearances lie. Evidence: Athena tests Telemachus by forcing a journey. Penelope tests Odysseus. Rather than surrendering to hope, Odysseus tests servants by entering as a beggar. Recognition scenes rely on proof, not sentiment. So what does this mean? Trust is not the same as blind belief. Trust is earned through repeated contact with reality. In workplaces, families, and politics, systems collapse when no one can verify who is loyal, competent, or safe. Theme 6. Justice that risks becoming contagion. Claim: the poem restores order through violence, then immediately shows how violence invites more violence. Evidence: the suitor's deaths solve the palace crisis but provoke revenge. Odysseus's readiness for another fight suggests the household is not automatically healed. Divine intervention is required to stop escalation. So what? Societies often seek closure through punishment, purges, or symbolic victories. The Odyssey argues that punishment can restore a boundary, but it can also plant the next conflict unless something larger forces restraint. Character arcs. Odysseus. At the start, Odysseus believes return is a matter of endurance and cleverness, and Odysseus expects the world to recognize the rightful king once the king arrives. By the end, Odysseus understands return requires proof, patience, and a willingness to act like a stranger in his own life until the right moment. The turning points are the Cyclops' taunt, the underworld prophecy, the discipline with the sirens, and the decision to enter Ithaca as a beggar instead of a conqueror. Telemachus. Telemachus begins as a young man trapped in a house that no longer obeys him. Telemachus becomes a political actor by traveling, learning how other kings rule, and returning with clarity about what must be done. Telemachus's arc matters because it turns the story from a single man's return into a generational repair of authority. Penelope. Penelope's arc is an endurance strategy under coercion. Penelope does not wait. Penelope manages time, controls information, and uses public rituals to delay collapse. Penelope's final test of Odysseus makes love compatible with reality. Structure. The poem's structure makes return feel like reconstruction rather than a straight line. The opening focuses on Ithaca and Telemachus, so the audience understands what is at stake before Odysseus appears. When Odysseus finally enters the story, Odysseus's past arrives as a deliberate narrative inside the Phaeacian court, turning memory into currency. The repeated pattern of hospitality scenes, tests, and recognitions creates a rhythm that feels almost procedural. A stranger arrives. The household responds. The response reveals character. That rhythm ties monsters and humans into the same moral field. Polyphemus and the suitors are different threats, but both are judged by how they treat guests and limits. The most potent symbols are domestic: the bow, the bed, the scar, and the threshold of the house. These objects anchor identity in things that cannot be faked by speech alone. The poem does not let rhetoric win without proof, what most summaries miss. Many summaries treat the Odyssey as a travel adventure with a revenge ending. That misses the poem's real engine, household governance. The monsters are dramatic, but the suitors are the true crisis because the suitors demonstrate how power is taken in peacetime. The poem is obsessed with who eats whose food, who speaks in whose hall, who sleeps in whose bed, and who gets to define legitimacy. Another missed element is how much of the story is about information control. Telemachus's journey is not only a coming-of-age trip, it is an intelligence mission in a world without reliable communication. Odysseus's survival repeatedly depends on what others know or do not know about Odysseus, and the final plan works because knowledge is managed like a weapon. Finally, the ending is not a simple triumph. The poem restores order, then shows that restoration is unstable unless the community accepts it. The last threat is not a monster at sea. The last threat is social retaliation at home. Relevance today. The Odyssey maps cleanly onto modern life because modern life still runs on absence, reintegration, and contested legitimacy. First, it is a return from war story that anticipates the psychological problem of coming back. People return from combat, high-stress careers, trauma, or long isolation, and find that home kept moving. The hardest work is not survival. It is re-entry. Second, it is about institutions under parasitic pressure. The suitors are a metaphor for any group that exploits a system's generosity until the system collapses. Replace the palace with a company, a government program, or a family business, and the logic holds. Unclear leadership invites predation. Third, it is about reputation management. Odysseus's name is both an asset and a liability. In a media environment where visibility triggers backlash, the poem feels modern. Being known can create threats you cannot control. Fourth, it is about border ethics and hospitality. Who counts as a guest, who counts as a threat, and who has authority to decide are live political questions today, especially under migration pressure and polarized debates about belonging. Fifth, it is about technology like temptation. The Lotus, the Sirens, and Calypso all offer versions of frictionless satisfaction. Abandon the difficult goal, remain comfortable, and choose the shortcut. Modern attention economics runs on the same premise. Sixth, it is about leadership under uncertainty. Odysseus is forced to make decisions with partial information, unreliable teammates, and trade-offs where every option costs lives. That is crisis leadership in any era. Seventh, it is about trust in a world of deception. Disguise is everywhere in the poem, and so are tests. In modern life, identity is also mediated. Profiles, brands, narratives, and the need for verification has returned with force. Ending explained. The ending resolves the external crisis by removing the suitors and restoring Odysseus to the household, but it does not present restoration as automatically peaceful. The palace is reordered, yet the community remains volatile, because the violence that fixes one injustice can ignite another. The ending means the return is real only when it is recognized, verified, and accepted by the people who must live with it. Odysseus wins by reclaiming the house, but the poem insists that authority has social consequences beyond the walls of the palace. The final divine intervention matters because it exposes a limit of human solutions. The gods do not erase what happened. The gods force a stop so the island does not become a self-renewing feud. The poem ends with stability imposed, which leaves an aftertaste. Peace is possible, but it is not guaranteed by victory alone. Why it endures? The Odyssey endures because it refuses to treat home as a sentimental destination. Home is a system. Home is a set of obligations, memories, hierarchies, and fragile agreements about who belongs where. The poem makes return both a desire and a threat, because return disrupts the new order that formed in your absence. This story is for readers who like moral tension within a vivid narrative and who want adventure that serves a deeper psychological point. It is also for anyone who has felt the strange distance of coming back, after a breakup, a hard year, a long project, or a major move, and realizing that the old life does not simply resume. Some readers will not enjoy the poem's values. The violence is stark, the social hierarchy is rigid, and the ethics can feel alien. But that is also part of the work's value. It forces a confrontation with how order was imagined in an older world and how easily justice can tilt into excess. In the end, the hardest question is the one the poem never stops asking. When you finally reach home, will home still have a place for you? For more insight and less noise, subscribe and explore the full range at taylortailored.co.uk.